Boston. So there were two things, in my opinion, that completely undid them in this series. First of all, the defensive end. And we talked a lot about this over the course of this series because they did have some flashes of really high-level defense in Game 4 and 5 and 6. But, the biggest fundamental difference between this Celtics team and last year's Celtics team is last year's Celtics team, I left every game thinking, oh my gosh, that's one of the best defensive teams I've ever seen. I literally said on my show last year that I think is the best defense in modern NBA history, especially in the half court. It was their transition defense that did them in last year. This year, they went from being a truly elite, generationally great defense to a pretty good defense. And when their offense is susceptible to the stretches of dysfunction that they are susceptible to, they don't have the margin for error to be a pretty good defensive team. They needed to be a great defensive team. Like, Caleb Martin, as great as he was in this series, like, I'm watching that second half and I'm like, okay, he just pump faked at Grant Williams and Grant Williams left his feet, and so he just sidestepped into a wide open three. Okay, he's dribbling along the baseline. Tatum's got him. Okay, Tatum calls for a switch. Marcus Smart is standing up out of a defensive stance and just lets Caleb Martin walk into a, pull-up 10-footer on the baseline right at the third quarter buzzer. That's wide open look for an in-rhythm shooter. Okay, now we're in the fourth quarter. Here's a transition possession. Caleb Martin's dribbling. He has the ball in his hands. He's got the ball in his hands on the right wing. No Celtic is guarding him. And he just walks into a wide open three at the top of the key. Like, there's a reality to the fact that Miami shot really well and they got some timely contributions from players that aren't the same type of blue chip prospects that Boston has. But guess what? You also allowed them to get comfortable with a defensive identity that you had all season long, which was a clear level below what you were last year. And it's the latest example of listen to what the regular season teaches us as it pertains to the trends over the course of the regular season. Obviously, the regular season has a lot of fool's gold in it, but what I always say is watch defensive ratings. Why do we watch defensive ratings? We watch defensive ratings because they are the best indicator of the night in, night out commitment to the defensive end of the floor. Like I said, it's not a big shock that the Lakers, as good as they were defensively after the deadline, that they were also good defensively during the playoff run. It's not a big shock that Boston, even though they were still one of the top 10 defenses in the league, I think they finished, fourth or fifth or something like that, I can't remember exactly, but they were still top 10 defense, but if you look at the defensive rating, it was 8 points worse than it was last year. So is that not a significant indicator of the fact that they aren't as dialed in defensively as they were the previous year? So guess what? When the chips were down in a big Game 7, they were sloppy on their switches. They were sloppy in transition defense. They were sloppy locating shooters. Even in Game 6, when things were falling apart, they were sloppy handling those ghost screens with Duncan Robinson and Jimmy Butler. They were losing shooters all over the floor just in basic swing pass situations because guys aren't paying attention. They were not the same defensive team. And that's why they weren't able to get to the same level as an NBA Finals team that was 2 wins away from the title as they did last year. Secondly, the lack of a spammable action. So I talked about this a lot over the course of this series because it was a part of how Boston got back into the series was Jayson Tatum started to have some success with cleared side ISOs and attacking a little bit more from the mid-range. But even then, it wasn't to the extent that it needs to be. What does Jimmy Butler do at this phase of his career in his early 30s? I think he's actually in his mid-30s now. But what does Jimmy Butler do? He's attacking with a live dribble until he gets the switch that he wants, and then Miami sends all their dudes over to the other end of the floor, and he just works out of a live dribble ISO on the cleared right side of the floor. That's what they do. And Miami, in a big situation, will just spam that action. They'll just run it every time down the floor. And they know that they're going to get a pretty high-quality shot in every single one of those situations, or at least a shot that Jimmy Butler's capable of making, right? With Boston, you'd have a 3-4 possession sequence like they did in that first half in Game 6 where Tatum's working, but then they get into the fourth quarter and then they just cease to do that. For whatever reason, Jayson Tatum doesn't feel comfortable doing the same thing over and over and over again from a specific spot on the floor. And, as we look forward with Boston, there's going to be a lot of talk about, we need to get them a better guard. It's like, well, you got Malcolm Brogdon last year, and yeah, obviously he got hurt in this series, but it didn't seem to solve that specific problem with their execution. Derek White's another good guard. I mean, you don't have the resources to get a superstar point guard, right? So like at a certain point, the ceiling of the Celtics is directly tied to Jayson Tatum's development. At this point, he's 100% a live dribble guy. He's a live dribble, above the break, pick and roll ISO, try to create a pull-up jump shot or get all the way to the rim for a layup. That's all he can do. And he's capable of going down to the post and making some plays there, but he needs to get to the point where he can comfortably sit down on the left block against a smaller defender and go 7-8 possessions in a row, just either draw on that second defender to get the defense into rotation or getting closer to the rim for a higher quality shot. That's the next step for him. Offensive versatility. He's turned himself into a very efficient offensive engine from the standpoint of spamming that high pick and roll stuff, but that is inherently one of the lower value plays in the NBA playoffs. Why? Long jump shots off the dribble. And I don't mean the short ones like Jimmy Butler's taking in the post. I mean long jump shots off the dribble in the NBA playoffs, those 24, 26 footers. Those are extremely difficult to make when you are fatigued and you don't have the lift in your legs to get up into that shot. And when everything you're doing off the dribble is or everything you're doing attacking to the basket is a live dribble from 26 feet, there's so much time for help defense to come over. There's a repeated rotation that the defense can make to kind of to solve any compromising that takes place. It's too easy to guard. And that's why, unless you're just the otherworldly best shooter, playmaker, ball handler in the league, like Steph Curry, you can't spam high pick and roll the way that Jayson Tatum does in these settings, especially in these rock fight games, these bigger, stronger forwards, the ones that are really good, the Kawhis, the Jimmy Butlers, the LeBrons. What do? They get a matchup they like and they take them close to the basket with their back to the basket so they can protect the basketball, and they go to short 10 to 12 foot shots in the lane or in the short corner that they can make at an extremely high percentage. That's what LeBron did this entire playoff run. It's what Jimmy Butler did this entire playoff run. That's what the best big wings in the league do. And that's what Jayson Tatum has to add over the course of the next few seasons. He needs to add a reliable back to the basket bully ball game because he's damn strong and he's damn big and he's an underrated playmaker and he's got great touch. And if he polishes that stuff up, he's going to start thriving in these types of games. As we look forward for Boston, that's their only hope. With Jaylen Brown. And look, they're in a tough position because with the way the CBA is structured, he's going to make way too much money, But at the end of the day, yes, Jaylen Brown completely crumbled in this series, completely lost confidence. His ball handling is a real problem. All of that is true, but he's a lot better than he looked. He was a hell of a lot better just last year in the playoff run when they were 2 wins away from the title. Jaylen Brown is still a top 15, 20 player in this league, which means he deserves a max contract. And you certainly have no method to replace him with comparable players in the trade market. You're going to get 75 cents on the dollar if you do so. So as unfortunate as it is, you have to re-sign him. That's the best path forward for Boston is pay everybody, go forward, and hope that Jayson Tatum over the coming years develops into that offensive engine that can thrive in these late playoff situations. It didn't really come back to bite them until the Golden State Warriors series last year, bit them a little bit earlier this year, but that's the big problem. Not ancillary ball handling, not aggregate ball handling, the top end ball handling. They need Jayson Tatum to take that next step.